Dan. I'm going to go ahead and get started.
You're not waiting.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Thompson. I am president of the EWM Research Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I think it's appropriate. I believe this is the second Meet the Masters series. The first one was with Sheldon Lubar, and I think it's appropriate that we are here in the Lubar School of Business for this event. As many of you know, Scale Up is about many things, but it's about growing the ecosystem here in Milwaukee. I think if Kanti Prasad, our dean, was here, and Kanti regrets he couldn't be here to welcome you himself, he would point out that the Lubar School has been part of this for a long time. And so it's appropriate that we're here in the Lubar School. It's also appropriate to point out that we're soon launching the Lubar Center for Entrepreneurship, which will enhance those efforts at EWM. And we're really looking for and finding ways that this will integrate well with Scale Up. So we're pleased to host you here this morning. It's my pleasure to welcome the Scale Up team and introduce Greg Dorf from JPMorgan Chase.
I can talk almost that fast, and I'll try. This will not be an infomercial on JPMorgan Chase, just a welcome to all of you. It's wonderful to see a full room like this. This program, Scale Up, is scaling as we speak, and that's one of the reasons why I personally have asked for the opportunity to become a sponsor of Scale Up. I have joined on the bandwagon myself personally, and there's two real reasons here. One is with all of the activity taking place in the Milwaukee area with startups, with early stage, Scale Up has already proven to be a real contributor and a difference maker in the businesses that are of size and have opportunity to keep driving our economy. Second reason is particularly sponsoring the Masters is I just think that we are blessed here in Milwaukee to have people like George, like Shel Lubar, who was our first speaker, who not only have paved the roadmaps for successful growth of business, but continue with unwavering support to help the rest of us try to follow suit. With that, just proud to get to be part of this. George, I think that every master ends up kind of donating another building to the university. Yeah, I'll get out of your way.
Should we go from there? George, please come on. I'm Dan Isenberg. I'm one of the leaders of the Scale Up Milwaukee program. I'm an out-of-towner. I spend a lot of time here, and I see at least a few familiar faces. I guess it's even better that I see a few unfamiliar faces, so I'm glad that more people are coming to these events. How many people here have seen George Mosher in presentations or talked to him, met him, interacted with him? About a good half. Take out a piece of paper, if you don't mind. And as we start talking, those of you who know him or have read about him, and just jot down one or two adjectives that you think describe George. And what I'd like to do at the end is come back and hear those adjectives and see if you keep them the same. The one adjective that you can't use is nice. Not because he isn't, but because that's an easy way out.
Okay. It's better in Spanish, bonita. Especially put the word muy in front of it.
Especially the feminine.
Right.
So the purpose of these Meet the Master programs, as I see it, is to bring to the forefront those people in the community, and it turns out that there are quite a few of them, who've actually built something to scale, and to try and, in this very short 45-minute discussion, begin to eke out, I don't know if that's the right word, tease out of their experience some of the values, principles, attitudes, learnings, and experiences that have to do with building things to scale. One of the underlying very, very simple, very simplistic notions of Scale Up Milwaukee and other projects we do like this is that the more companies that grow more and more rapidly, the more the regions prosper. It's not the only thing, but without more and more companies growing more rapidly, then prosperity is elusive. And so it's very important to highlight these examples. George, can you hear me, by the way? Okay, great. And this is an interactive session. We'll start it off together, but really feel free to those of you who have some inner Easterner in you, feel free to break in anytime and interrupt, because it's much more about a conversation than a monologue. Well, George, let's just start with the beginning,
Sure.
way back when. And George wrote a book. This is the bestseller book called, actually someone else wrote it, but it's called The Biography of George A. Mosher. It's a very matter-of-fact title, right? But there are a lot of facts in it. I won't read you all these facts, just a few. And the question I'm going to start off with is sort of formative experiences.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time. I wrote a book on stories of entrepreneurs from around the world, and Stephen Jobs wasn't mentioned in the book. So the more ordinary entrepreneurs. And they're also a formative experience, or a whole range of formative experiences. So just some bare bones facts. Born in 1939 in Detroit, but moved very early on to the Boston area, grew up in Newton, if I get this
Right.
correct. Father was a salesman, died in World War II when George was 5 or 6 years old. And he continued to grow up in Newton and went to Harvard College, went to Harvard Business School right after. But in between, sort of growing up, it's interesting, some of the examples in here of you doing things on your own.
Well,
These
it
things
started
are-
out, Dan, after my first father died, my mother, at my suggestion, remarried. And he was very thrifty. And he would take sandwiches to work every day. And I really didn't like sandwiches, so I wanted to get my own source of money. So I was always looking I shoveled snow. Now, I haven't shoveled snow for 40 years, but I shoveled snow, and then I wound up...
Because they don't have it in Milwaukee.
Well, I had my snow shoveling. And so then I got into anything that I looked entrepreneurial. I drove an ice cream truck for 3 years. The third year, I wound up earning $2,000 at the time when tuition at Harvard was $1,650. So when we talk about the cost of going to college, now the government was paying for my college because my father had passed away, so this was really spending money so I could eat a lot better than the sandwiches. So, and I also bought a
But you did a deal with another student later on in which you bought his lunch ticket at a discount.
Oh, right. That was a small detail. I found that I found that you could get a lunch card because I was a commuter for the first couple of years, and we ate at a place where you bought lunch tickets, and then anyone could eat there. But you had people who came from well-off parents that were happy to sell their $5 coupon for $4.75 because their parents were going to pay for something that was on their dorm bill. Otherwise, they'd have to come up with cash. So it was looking for a little edge as I went along.
Well, even the ice cream truck,
Right.
there were some mini innovations in the way you did things with the
Well,
ice
there
cream
was
truck.
at the yard that we went out of, there was a kid who was hanging around and wanted to come on the truck, and eventually I started paying him $3 a day to go on the truck with me, except on rainy days when he came for free. And that helped with discipline because he was able to squirt ice cream or squirt whipping cream in some kid who was giving me a hard time, and something that I could never have done. So all that worked out well.
And you chose this maybe too detailed, but from the book, you also chose routes that other people were ignoring.
Right, I decided to build my own route. And I went back before Faneuil Hall is what it is now. That was my last stop of the day, where the workers all ordered massive ice creams because this was their 10 o'clock snack.
So what are some of the learnings in these early formative experiences?
Well, the word was hustle. You know, basically, how much is your time? And this I would say to everybody. If you want to earn $50,000 a year, you've got to earn $25 every hour. If you want to earn $100,000, you've got to earn $50 every hour. I think people sometimes forget that time is money, and I think working productively was a major learning from that. Dan.
From the outside, going from Newton all the way over to Cambridge,
Well, that
and
was
then
my
all the way
local
back
school.
to Boston across the river.
Right.
It seems kind of insular. Well, I don't think
Don't
it is,
forget
but it
this
seems
was
that way.
Don't forget this was 50 years ago. The world was a lot smaller than it is today. What I had not realized, the kids who came from the Midwest were regarded as jocks, but actually they were well off. They came from Fox Point or places like that. Rich in the East was the Kennedys. and then there was kind of middle class, and the kids from the Midwest, they weren't the jocks. They were the ones who liked to play football and baseball. And
So and then you're in your, we'll get to the present pretty quick, or at least to the modern, the later years soon.
But I would say that I knew I wanted to go to the business school before I knew where I wanted to go to college. So I almost went somewhere else so it would be different. But
So you sort of engineered getting into the business. Why did you want to go to the business school?
Because I viewed business as a game that I like playing games.
You're a chess player, Monopoly player.
Monopoly, I was a good Monopoly player. I won't go into that now.
So it's a game.
Right.
How is that different from the way you hear it talked about by other people?
Well, I think the world has changed. One of the things that I would try and emphasize to people is that profit is the fuel that drives a business. People have gotten into so many messages as to what their purpose in life should be, that first of all you need, in my opinion, to build success, then you can do other things. But you need to concentrate on building your success before you're going to change the world. And I think in a game, you have a winner, you feel good you feel good playing a game. If you've tried hard, even if you lose, if you're playing someone who's better than you, but you've done your best, you will feel good about that. And there's a score kept. You know when you've won, you know when you've lost, you know when things are going well.
When I hear you say that, I hear something that you're not saying, which you hear other people say a lot, and that is, let's celebrate failure. And there's FailCon, the art of failure. There's all these conferences which talk about how wonderful it is to fail.
I would say let's dismiss failure and go on. I think there's a great book on grief that we now use as our Christmas, or as our condolence card if someone has grief, and it says there's 14 stages of grief. And some people get stuck. Everyone goes through the 14 stages. And if you have a business failure and it doesn't work, you need to go on. Like there was one day early on where I got the idea at the marathon I could sell sandwiches and Cokes from a Hertz rented truck. Well, it turned out that a Hertz rented truck is not the same as an ice cream truck. It didn't have the measure of come on in. So we'd made hundreds of sandwiches that we gave to an agency for the poor, and we bought the Coke on consignment, so we returned it all. So I dismissed my $100 that I'd lost and then went on to something else. But it was a reminder that you're not invincible, and that and one of the things I'm now saying on my angel investment is keep your original investment small and then be willing to make more investments when things are going well. But if things are not going well, it's time to move on and do something else.
Just like take small incremental risks and cut your losses
right.
when they're small.
Right.
Isn't that what they call lean startup these days, and are selling millions of copies of books?
Well, I haven't seen that, but
you're
probably right.
It's a movement. Lean.
Right.
It's called lean,
right.
And it's a movement throughout the world which says that the way you should build a business is the way you just said.
Used to be called bootstrapping, so it's the same concept with a different name.
It may be the way my grandfather did it.
Okay.
So like common sense, but it's not so common. Just to go back to some of the work experiences, you worked at the Harvard Business, Harbiz, and the Crimson. You had some impact there. And then Look Magazine.
Right.
There's sort of the dots begin to line up.
Right. Well, at the Harbiz, which was a business school newspaper, this was an interesting lesson because it had always been run as a nonprofit. And that year, some of the student association made the decision that they would make it profitable. And my roommate was the editor and someone else was the business manager, and I took over the advertising manager. And I went away for the summer, but I hired some people to sell some ads, which I had done before in connection with the Harvard Yearbook and some other kinds of things. And it turned out the paper opened at 16 pages instead of being the 4 pages it had been before. Came up with the concept of take an ad, you could X dollars a week, you could cancel it at any time, and all the advertisers said yes to that, and then became a much more vibrant newspaper.
George, the first part of your life sounds like you learned how to sell things.
Right.
The second phase, it sounds like you built a relationship with media. in those, what was, I mean, with communication through media of some kind. Is that wrong?
Probably, but I didn't think of it that way. I think when I got to look from the Harvard Business School, I did a better job of picturing how look could be succful than
Look
I
used
did
to
of
be a magazine.
doing my own job. So,
So, and from there into NI,
business and institutional furniture.
BIF.
Right.
As an
I had a
employee.
headmate at Harvard Business School who had come from Minneapolis, had worked across the block from me in New York for a couple of years, really wanted to get to the Midwest, had come to Green Bay. They had a company that was selling church and school furniture by mail, and it had lost $20,000 the first year, lost $10,000 the second year, lost $20,000 the third year, and they were just trying to decide what to do with it, and it was co-owned by one of their manufacturers reps, Kruger.
Right.
At the
Kruger
time.
Industries, which is
It's KI Industries now. And my headmate called me up and said, how would you like to take over a mail order company in Milwaukee? And I hadn't had that opportunity before, so 3 weeks later, I was out here in East Troy.
Was it hard to drag you for the first time in your life away from the East Coast, away from Boston?
No, I think I was ready to. My image of Milwaukee was somewhere between Newark and Bridgeport, but I decided there was a clause in my contract that I could move the company to Chicago because I wasn't sure there'd be the right. I'd find the right wife in Milwaukee, but.
So George was still single at that time.
At that time,
Look,
right.
I want to come back in a little while. I think we have to talk about the family aspect of the business as well, because that's obviously it's very key. It comes out in the book very strongly. But the pluses and minuses, balance sheet of working with NIB.
No, B
BIF.
B and I.
Okay.
Business and institutional.
Because there's another acronym that comes later, which
Okay,
is
that's
another
right.
with all the N's and B's.
I
and
get
things.
rid of acronyms.
Okay. Good. So what were the balance sheet of the pluses and minuses? Because that ended in a very interesting way, that relationship.
Well, what happened is that in the first year our sales were about, when I took over it was $250,000. In the first year I was able to increase the sales to about $750,000. And if we think about this, $1 at that point was worth you could multiply by 5. When you think about $1 million, that was equivalent of $5 million in today's world.
So that was $1 million business when you
Right.
took it over.
But in about 6 years, it went from 1 million to 2 million. And in 1972, I found out what the answer was, and we went from 2 million to 8 million, and it was very profitable. And we were beginning to add office furniture to the catalog. But the people who controlled the company, I own 1/3 of the stock, the people who controlled the company thought in the projections that I was going to be making too much money. And so they wanted to change. I had a deal that said I would be entitled to 10% of the profits, and they thought that was too high. And I felt like I'd been working to build up this. Julie, my wife, and I looked at each other, and in 7 weeks we decided to start our own business. And in 20 minutes I went into Roger Dirksen and I had the money I needed. And 7 weeks, we hired 2 people to prepare a catalog, one in Milwaukee and one in New York. And in 7 weeks we were out with a catalog called National Business Furniture.
So it was a similar, very, very, very similar
Well, we
business.
changed because I didn't want to compete directly. Instead of emphasizing church and school furniture, it was kind of a breakthrough. No one had been selling office furniture through a catalog, but we had found a desk that we could sell for $100 that was made of wood. And so we got close to the manufacturer because what I realized as a minister would much rather be sitting behind a wood desk than a steel desk. But wood desks had always been expensive, so there was a lot of response to a wood desk that they could buy for $100. So we in effect put all the office furniture up front, used a name that would be rememberable, National Business Furniture.
Sounds big.
Avoided the initials. I mean, we only used NBF internally. But so you had the feeling when you got this catalog, because it was professionally prepared, that it had been around, but you had just never seen it before.
So the first employer, they lost, and they shot themselves in the foot by looking by looking at how much you were making rather than how much they were making.
Well,
You ended up buying. You ended up buying.
You know,
them.
they were in Green Bay. I think if you actually look at the world now, the salaries in New York and San Francisco that are one level, there are salaries in Milwaukee, in Cleveland, another level, and small town is at a third level, and they were feeling uncomfortable that the projections would show that I would earn more money than they were earning. So.
But was this? But they also would learn a lot. There's a hand up. Yes.
I'm curious about this, that in 7 weeks you were able to put together a catalog. So how did you select what was going in that catalog? Did you vet it in any way, or was it just what was available when in the catalog?
What I realized is that I had done a lot of studies of numbers, et cetera, but ultimately there were 40 people, our suppliers, that were key. And I called up each of the 40 suppliers and said I was going to start this business. They sort of felt like I was the business elsewhere, and all I asked for them is that I could buy on the same terms that I had been buying before. There were some issues of credit, but those got taken care of fairly quickly, because most of them felt, okay, they'd lose small if it lost, but they had a big potential future, because we had now become a big customer of many of our suppliers. So it was essentially a question of picking out the products, getting the pictures, and assembling the catalog.
So give us the headlines. What with national business? What happened?
National
How
business,
long?
we ran.
End result.
Okay, it took about 3 years to get to $3 million, and then we basically doubled every 5 years, which is 15% per year. And one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is every 3 to 4 months we would very formally sit down and say, how can we grow? And we would line up all the ways we could grow, because you would tend to get little ideas. We should do this, we should do that. And as we listed the ways to grow, what seemed to come through at the top were 3 things. One is that you could mail more catalogs. And there's ultimately a limit, because you in the mail order industry, you hit the wall in the number of catalogs you can mail, but that limit kept increasing. And ultimately we mailed 17 million catalogs, so there were a lot of catalogs. The second was we could add more pages, and that turned out to be a big breakthrough, because we ultimately had a 100-page catalog, a 200-page catalog, and a 400-page catalog. And we worked very hard with our vendors not to drop things. A lot of people keep dropping things that are marginal. And if they drop 10%, then they have to grow 20% in order to have a net increase of 10. So the vendors would tend to want to drop things, because at the trade shows they'd had to have new products, because dealers are always asking what's new. But we said, keep them, people want to match the furniture. So our customer list would get the 400-page catalog, and the prospects would get the 100-page catalog. And ultimately, by then we would intermail the in-between size catalogs as reminders. So we became very important to our vendors, and the vendors were really our key. Our customers were statistical, but we treated the vendors as key.
Interesting. So 3 things. So one was increase the number of catalogs, increase the number of pages.
And then the third thing is we were very efficient. One of the most important courses I had in school was a course in production. And ultimately I realized you can treat an office as a factory. You can't call it a factory, but you're going through certain processes. We were able to run this company at 4% payroll, including my salary.
4% of the revenues
right,
went to
including my salary. Now, we were ultimately spend 15 to 20% on mailing out catalogs, but nobody was as efficient as we were. So ultimately, all of our competitors would go out of business, and then we would buy them, because they had accumulated lists of people who were willing to buy furniture by mail.
So you did a few things. First of all, you invented the long tail. Right. I don't know if you invented it, but you exploited the long tail.
It's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
That's happened a long time ago. So other questions?
Well, I'd like to make one other comment. Part of the genius.
Introduce, this is Roger Dirksen. Roger was the person I walked to and got the money in 20 minutes, and Roger and I now work together on my angel investments.
And he features prominently as one of the supporting characters in this book that you're going to all go out and buy afterwards.
But I'd like to make a quick observation that part of the genius of what George did was he carried no inventory. But his margins were still as good as they would be if you had carried inventory. So that cost dropped right to the bottom line and went into profitability.
George.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Andy Ahrens from Avant.com, applied to be part of the Scalerator. In today's day and age, do you still see mail catalogs, something that should be going forward?
The mail and the internet work very well together. The catalog is proactive and it arrives on your desk. Uline, which we're familiar with, figures that 2/3 of their sales are driven by the catalog and 1/3 are driven by the internet. Even though if you put shipping on the internet, that's what will come up first. So any mail order company should come up with something, any internet company should come up with something that's a catalog that they should mail to their customer list. One of the things I had not mentioned is we were able to control payroll, build tremendous loyalty among our employees, because with a low payroll cost, we never had to lay people off. We could prune people that we didn't want to have anymore, but we never laid people off. And what would happen is in good times, you could mail more catalogs and people are more experimental in good times. In poor times, they hunker down to the people they're used to doing business. Or what we found is if we'd mailed them enough catalogs in the past, if they needed furniture, the other competitors were not mailing as much. So we got some good results from the mailing lists that we had used consistently. But the internet, you have to go and it's hard for it to build loyalty. Now I'll back up a little bit. You asked what were the key changes. Near the very end, we bought a company called OfficeFurniture.com. OfficeFurniture.com had never made any money, but it was #1 on Google. And it basically sold mostly household type office furniture. And we bought it with the idea that are you looking for furniture for your house, or are you looking for an office? So we would say, okay, go here if you're looking for an office, and go here for your house. So it built up a substantial business on both. And then once people bought, now OfficeFurniture.com continued to be mostly internet, but National Business Furniture, once people got their catalog in their hands, it was much easier to select. Let me back up. Office Furniture would be good at selling one item. You need a chair, but National Business Furniture was successful in selling suites of offices. So the average order was much higher at National Business Furniture. And people remembered the name National Business Furniture. Now, one place that initials mattered, after I left, they went out and paid $20,000 for the name NBF.com. So that made the company look even bigger, put it in the range of General Motors or something like that.
Now, you sold the business.
We sold the business 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Right.
Are the figures
They're public. We sold it for $85 million. And it was bought by a company in Germany that has been in business for 250 years. And there's another lesson that I'll share. This German company does something different than American companies do. They pay people to make their goals, and they do not give them much of a bonus for exceeding their goals. So what they want is they want conservative projections that you can meet. That's how you last 250 years.
And did you
That was after I sold the company, I learned that. But what I had always done is we set up projections and goals. Americans need goals. But you need to spend on the projections And what happens is most companies, and I see this a lot in startup, they have these very rosy projections which they feel like they need to raise the money. Then they go out spending the money on the projections. And then when the revenue falls short, Uber, for example, gets tremendous press, but the numbers I've seen show that they took in $400 million and are spending $800 million, and they're getting the money from investors. It may or may not be a good service and a good deal, but that can't last forever.
You have a number, there's a chapter called Mosher's Maxims.
Right.
And several of the maxims have to do with your philosophy of investment, incrementalism and so on, that ways of mitigating some of the risks.
Well, because I didn't have any money to start with, we were really in the business of selling furniture before we bought it, because it was being drop shipped. And the credit card came in. The credit card is kind of an escrow, and that made a big difference, both the catalog business and the internet. Because before that, you might send a check in for $20 for something, and if you never got it, there wasn't much you could do about it. And people were more upset that the person had gotten rich by bilking lots of people than they were about their $20, but it made them not fully trust mail. And catalogs basically make money out of the repeat purchase. So catalog industry always made sure they gave excellent customer service. So the whole catalog industry was growing, and as people bought items for their personal use, they were more willing to buy for business use.
I want to go back to the role of family, as this is the story, the business story is evolving. The family is very much a part of the business.
Well, when we started the second company, I said to my wife, what I found is that everybody needs somebody they can talk to. You have got the artistic skills. You can be the person I talk to, shall we do this or that, sort of the sounding board. And with some reluctance, she accepted that role. And we agreed that we would print in November.
Why was she reluctant, if I may?
Well, she had an image of, she is the type of, forget, she was brought up 50 years ago where the woman's job was in the home.
So to criticize would be also,
Right.
she was being modest.
Right.
I don't know about business.
But also I can't go into all that.
Okay, wasn't her place.
All right.
Okay.
But she accepted that role, and we agreed that we would print in November and in May, even though we weren't mailing till later, so she could have Christmas off and she could have the summer off.
But she ended up playing a very active role.
She played a very active role. She had, men tend to regard, the word shopping means something different to men and women. Men, it's a comparative exercise. Okay, this flight to New York is $183, and that one's $195, but I have to get up 15 minutes earlier. Is it worth the trade-off? Women, do I like it? Can I afford it? Is it me? Women buy everything, like men buy cars like women buy everything. But furniture is a female. Furniture is a female purchase even when men do it. Is this a look? Is this the way I want my office to look? They're not comparing the last $10. And the advantage of a catalog is you covered the complete range of prices. So you could find something that would meet your needs at a price you were willing to pay.
So Julie was responsible.
Julie
became responsible.
And she was also, she's a heavy catalog shopper. She likes to shop. And she understood how important the subtleties were. All of the pictures would have plants in the background, things would look soft. If you look, you can think about the catalogs that come to your house. You can sense what this company is by looking at their catalog. Is it low priced and promotional? Is it expensive but worth it if you have the money? Is it middle of the road? An LL Bean is different than a Neiman Marcus. And it doesn't, you just get that sense of what it is. It's a lot harder on the internet. Not impossible, but a lot harder on the internet.
So was this a family business?
So it was a family business. She and I owned all of
it. And your
it.
children get involved at all?
Our children made up their mind that they didn't want to replicate this. They wanted to do their own thing. So one of them is a documentary filmmaker, one lives in New Zealand as a full-service mother, and my son is a wine sales manager in Chicago. he went to Columbia in the Culinary Institute because he said, Dad, you just want to sit around and talk to people. Why don't you never want to do anything?
So did they hear the dinner conversations? Did they get infused at all with the or was this separate? Did you?
Well, there was some overlap, and I think that was part of the reason why they would see if we operated on the basis of 60-60. My wife had 60% of the decisions in some areas, and I had 60% of the decisions in other areas, and that's like the catalog. If she wanted to do it in a certain way, we would do it that way.
You made a lot of money.
Right.
I'm sure you paid whatever taxes you had to pay, and even after that, there was a lot left over. Your life changed when you sold the business, I assume, at least in some ways.
Not really.
Talk about that.
Well, first of all, my wife had a lung transplant. She had been sick before, and what reason the company was now ready to be sold. It was probably ready to be sold, but in 2001, the office products market fell from $13 billion to $8 billion. There was, in my opinion, when the Gore-Bush election was undecided, America stopped shopping for Christmas. And all of a sudden the results were out that Christmas was a weak Christmas. At the end, everyone went out and bought gift cards, but that was counted as January spending. But if you take a woman out of the store, she's just going to buy less. If she goes shopping, she'll buy more things. And business had been hurt by the Y2K, also the build-up on that. And so businesses sort of said, we're not going to do anything marginal. Now, it didn't affect us as much because we were more the incidental purchase as opposed to outfitting new office buildings. But it affected it. So when she started to get sick, we weren't willing to sell. The company was always profitable, but it had declined. And so we waited until we could build it up. And I wasn't really ready to retire, which is why I haven't really retired.
How old when you sold? How old were you?
I was 66.
Yeah, a lot of energy left. And so since then?
Since then, I've now made over 200 angel investments.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
That's a lot of angel investments.
Well,
you're quite an angel.
Well, I decided that I had some money. I could either be philanthropic, but a lot of people could be philanthropic, or I could...
Which you are also.
But could also get into angel investing. And I had done some of that before while we were selling the company. And so I started listing to I joined the Golden Angels, Marquette Golden Angels, and I joined Silicon Pastures. And then after a while, a lot of people approached me because people know who I am. And so
and you got Roger over
and every
here
week Roger and I meet for breakfast.
I don't know, how would you define your role, Roger, in the angel investment space? You meet every week for a couple of hours, right?
Over breakfast.
I'll back up just for a minute, but when I left my employment in 1994, George and I had lunch, and he said, why don't you go buy something? So I said, okay. And he said, I'll be your initial investor. So I went and bought a bank. And we sold that in 2007. And when I retired, George said, I'm doing this angel investing. I need somebody to talk to. Will you read all of the material and sit and talk to me about it once a week?
No, you came to me, Roger, actually. You said, how do you keep track of all this stuff, right? And you had a suggestion. I said, sounds good.
So how do you keep track of all this stuff? 200. What's this breakfast meeting? How does it go? What does it sound like?
Every week we get updates.
You must have 20 to 30 updates on how many companies? If you have 200
our agenda is usually 20 to 30 items long.
What happens with email today, everybody sends out things by email. So I forward the emails to Roger. I read them.
Right.
Roger reads them.
But how do you do that with 30 companies every breakfast? They're 25.
Well, sometimes it just takes one or two comments, and sometimes it takes a half an hour.
Is it
item.
intuitive?
It just depends.
Is it intuitive, or did the comments you make, you just have succeeded in distilling this into the essence?
As a banker, I'd been reading business plans for 50 years, and so it's just another spot on the balance sheet.
Bankers have to learn. I needed someone like Roger because bankers know how to say no better. I'm more of a yes person, and I need a balance. Now, my wife tended to be I tended to be an optimist and she tended to be a pessimist. And realistically, the truth is in between.
Sure.
So,
Did you ring fence the amount of investment that you're willing, the exposure?
oh,
you can
right.
take?
Well, what I said actually is, and I said to our kids, and when you get some money, you can look at it as two ways. You can look at it as a big sum of money, or you can look at it as a flow of income. And I decided basically you have a flow, because you're not going to earn that kind of money again. You have to look at it as kind of, this is
An asset.
a flow of, otherwise it starts to go down and then you don't have it anymore. But I said you need 75%. I said to our kids each own 10% of the company. When we started the company, the two that were alive were given 10% of the company, and the one that was born afterwards was given 10%. So they, in effect, had their own money when we sold the company. And I said to them and my wife, take 75% of the money and have it professionally managed, and take 25% and save it for your dream. But also recognize you're going to want to help people, but you can't help everybody. You have to trust. So in effect, my wife and I had, when I was a kid, I had read a book, True Magazine, on how to guaranteed winning in roulettes. And I had gotten a roulette wheel, and I had filled this notebooks and notebooks on how this system. And so I couldn't wait till I was old enough to go to Las Vegas. And I got to Las Vegas, and it felt good to put the $100 bills in the safe deposit box. And then I got to Reno, and I
Wait,
lost.
so did it work?
And
No,
it
didn't.
essentially worked, but
Okay.
but my wife and I went to Las Vegas, and I would be $7 behind, and she was worried that I was going to be losing whatever we had. So we were going in January, and I said to her, "I want you," she said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "What I'd like is $500 in a rubber band." So that's what she gave me. So now I had enough money to play the system, because it took a little bit of stake. And so I said to her, it's the same situation. You worry, this is a fence around it, in your words, and I'm not going to go outside of that. And basically, we've been able to recycle it because we've had some significant. What happens is when you win big, and when you lose more often. But if you do it right, you lose small.
So you've had some losses of the 200 or so investments.
Well, roughly of the 200, 30 have been winners, 60 have been losses,
And the others
and
are?
110 are still out there trying to make it.
Are you going to keep going? Keep making investments?
Well,
Is that
I've been doing more in
evergreen?
real estate because I have to face the fact that I'm 76, and I want I'd like it to be relatively easier for the people who are going to have to unravel this at some point.
So George, I live in the Milwaukee area. I have a business of a couple $1 million, and I, your story is very inspiring to me. I want to grow my business. It's not only about the money, but money is part of it. And I want to grow my business. I want to be profitable, and I want it to be valuable. Well, what do I have to do to grow a $2 million business into a $20, $30 million business in whatever, 10 or 15 years?
Well, first of all, you have to think in terms of profits. I think that you need to be trying to make money. The other thing is you need to be growing.
Well, isn't that obvious?
No, it's not obvious.
Tell us, why not?
Because a lot of people think that what people are spending time doing is they're approaching people like me instead of approaching customers. And as you start a business and get going, you need to be finding the customer that's a logical prospect for your product, and work with them so that your product is tailored to what they want. And then you need to find some other customers. And you need to start out, in my mind, being a good salesman is to figure out who is the logical prospect for your product, and then convince them, and then execute well and do the job. If you get revenue, you will be able to find money. Mm-hmm. If you don't have money, because if you don't have the revenue, it will be a lot harder. So go for the customer, do it, work with them to make the product.
So saying I may have it backwards. I may have it by going and saying, I'm looking for venture capital or private equity, that's later. First, go out and develop your market.
Right. Find some customers, do it small.
Okay.
If your product is good, it's got to be good for somebody.
And if not,
then it's a
go do
dream.
something else. So that's number one. Is that it?
Right. Well, number two is to keep asking yourself, how can we grow? What are the logical add-ons? If you have one apartment building that's working for you, then you know more about apartment buildings than other people, so you can go out and buy a second one, but don't buy 10. What Roger likes to say is what he's found is that whenever a company tries to grow much faster than 15%, it runs into problems. And you need to get to an initial level. You can grow quickly to get to a level. But the rate of growth, people are trying for hockey sticks as opposed to evolutionary. Now, I heard Vince Martin give a speech once, and it mirrored what we had done, is that they were able to grow with Jason 7 to 8% per year, but the world wanted them to grow 15%. And they went out and bought other companies, and that's how they get the 15%. And as I look back on it, when I heard that speech, that's exactly what we did. We were growing internally at 7, and internally comes because you have customers. I realized, for example, customers care about you. At one point, I realized we were having 400 customer-generated requests for address changes, not post office generated. But the customers had bothered to tell us that this is our new address.
Yes. Keep
and one of the best sources of new business is somebody left one company and they went to another company. The old company was apt to keep buying from us, and the new company, now they had somebody who would call up and get our catalog and do business with us.
So this is, Reid Hoffman was quoted last week. And by the way, this is directly as a result of Scale Up Milwaukee. Reid Hoffman is the founder, one of the founders of LinkedIn. And he was quoted using a term blitz scaling.
Okay.
Just last week, he invented it. I don't know if I like it, but it's different from what you're proposing. He's talking about the Ubers and growing companies to billions of dollars really quickly.
Well, you may be able to do that in California, but you're not going to do it in Milwaukee. It's a different environment.
I think you're also raising the question of what exactly are you growing in California? Are you growing losses or are you growing profits?
Well, they're a profitable company. I wanted to make sure I said one thing,
Please.
especially in this environment, is I knew I wanted to go to the business school because that's what I was interested in. A lot of people think they want to go to business school because it'll look good on their resume. What you really learn in a business school is you learn how a business has got many different facets to it. It's not just sales, it's also finance, it's also managing people, it's also running an efficient operation. And what happens is if you just get a job, you wind up growing up in a silo. So you become an expert in that field, but you don't have that breadth that you would have if you go to business school. Now, if you have the luxury and do it for 2 years, that's great. But if you have a chance to sign up for the Scale Up Milwaukee program, you get 7 monthly meetings, a day and a half. You get at least that kind of thinking, and you get suggestions as to what else you can study or who else you need to talk to. And I think the business school here does not do as good a job as it could in selling why you should. If you're interested in business, you can still get a liberal arts education, which is important, but you get a well-rounded, you get to treat a business and recognize it as a whole.
So I think that is a very important takeaway. You need to have understanding of the disciplines and a holistic view of how they tie together. We have a couple more minutes for comments and questions. Do anybody have a question?
Now, I will introduce Teresa Esser, runs
She's also in the book.
Right, runs Silicon Pastures, and that's actually been my most successful entrepreneur. I just gave a presentation at Silicon Pastures. I made...
Which is, for those of us who don't know, is a...
Angel Investment Network.
And basically, I'd made 34 investments through Silicon Pastures. The 5 that were winners, I made $8 million. The 11 that were losses, I lost $800,000. And then the 19 that are still out there are have 1,800,000 in them. So even if I lost them, I'd be ahead in Silicon Pasture. So the takeaway is the wisdom of the crowd means something. I've done a better job when it's gone through the filtration process of being accepted by Silicon Pastures than my own infinite wisdom.
Did anybody who wrote down an adjective describing George, anybody change their adjective as we went along?
So I'd started with intellectually inquisitive, but very quickly realized intellectually is not the right word, it's pragmatically inquisitive, because I always find George's questions drive right to the practicality of where you're headed and kind of make you think about things you hadn't thought about.
Okay, great. I certainly take away that there's a lot of incredible practical wisdom in your experience. And in retrospect, it doesn't sound like rocket science, but it sounds very important.
Right. Keep it simple, stupid was a direct mail mantra. And the world has gotten more complex and people need to focus, in my opinion.
So we'd like to engage you for just 2 more minutes in another conversation. George, first of all, I think you gave an impromptu, unplanned advertisement for our Scalerator program. You have some material, I think. There are brochures out there on the Scalerator. It is a unique program in the world, and it's being copied in other places. But it is a forum for businesses with a few $1 million in revenues to learn how to be 10 times bigger, but not all at once, over time, to be stably and consistently bigger and better through learning and integrating a few of the important disciplines. So that's thank you for mentioning the Scalerator program. Elmer Moore has put your hand up, Elmer. I think everybody probably knows Elmer. He's running Scale Up Milwaukee and running the Scalerator program for us. Brian Schupper here. I don't see him. Brian Schupper there, right next. You should identify yourself, Brian. Stand up. Don't be so. Show your Easterner. Brian Schupper is the director of the Scale Up Milwaukee project, working for the GMC. Elizabeth Spates may be out taking care of things, but that's what she does. The Meet the Masters series, which this is the second of. The first was with Shel Lubar, as was mentioned already. We intend to continue it at the rate of 1 every month to 2 months. We'd like to have your suggestions about who'd you like to have a chance to have this kind of relatively intimate conversation with within the limits of time. And so please jot down on your evaluation form some names of people that you think you'd like them to open up the kimono with you together in a session like this. With that, I'll just, unless you have anything that you'd like to add, Elmer or Brian, I think, George, we've interacted here and there over the last couple of years, but for me, the chance to sit down and really have a conversation with you is a great treat for someone who respects people who grow businesses and make impact. It's phenomenal, and it's all in the book right here. Thank you for sending it to me.
Okay,
Very
you're
useful.
welcome.
Huh?
Amazon.
George?
No, it's unfortunately I'm running out of copies now. I printed 300 of them, and it's sort of, but it's not. If you wind up not selling it, then you don't have to get anybody's clearance, and all the rest. Life is much easier. So if somebody really wants to give me their card, if you just think you'd look at it for 5 minutes, don't. If you really want to give me a card,
I'll lend you my copy.
Okay.
We'll be frugal, okay?
Excellent.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I believe your vowels on the table.
And George, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I think it went well.
I find it riveting.
All right. I guess I need to get rid of this now. You're more used to dealing with these things than I am.
I once walked away with one.